Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome today Murray Grigor to our talk series on post-war and contemporary architecture. Consciously or not, for sure you know some of his movies on architecture, be it on Charles Rennie Mackintosh, on John Lautner, on Frank Lloyd Wright, or on Carlos Scarpa, or many other architects. And of course, you know the beautiful short movies with Hans Hollein for the Man Transform show, which were shown some months ago in our exhibition on Man Transform. Murray Grigor is one of the few movie directors with such a lasting and strong interest in architecture, palpable in all his movies, not only his documentaries on architecture. Among his numerous films, let me just mention the documentary on Charles Rennie Mackintosh, Space and Light, a documentary about St. Peter's Seminary in Cards Cross, The Hand of Adam on the 18th century Scottish architect Robert Adam, the movies Fire, Oasis, Faces and Design Being with Hans Hollein, the architecture of Frank Lloyd Wright, the architecture of Carlos Scarpa, In Search of Clarity, the architecture of Matthew Siegel, or Sir John Soane, an English architect and American legacy, as well as Infinite Space, the architecture of John Lautner. Beside these documentaries on architecture, let me add a fantastic movie which is called Cumbernauld Hit, a James Bond parody in an English megastructure, as well as the documentaries on Henry Moore, Eduardo Paolozzi, and George Willey, as well as further movies with Sean Connery as Wee Scott, Sean Connery's Edinburgh, as well as Ever to Excel.
That's enough, Junior.
No, now the prizes now. Murray Grigor was director of the Edinburgh International Film Festival between 1967 and 72, then its chair. He's fellow of the Royal Society of the Arts, honorary fellow of the Royal Incorporation of Architects in Scotland, and the Royal Institution of British Architects. Mr. Grigor was the first filmmaker to be awarded the American Institute of Architects Citation of Excellence, and then finally he's recipient of the Royal Television Society Wreath Award and of the Order of the British Empire, as well as Dr. Honoris Causa of two universities, and, the University Anglia Ruskin, as well as St. Andrews University. So let's start now.
Well, I could have done with half of that, Laurent.
No, actually, we needed somehow to know a little bit who you are, what you did, and now we are all set on the same standard.
Okay, very good.
Good. Let's begin with some biography or some biographical information. How did you come to the film? I read that you you graduate in sciences.
I did. My dad was a whiskey distiller and wanted me to go into the family business. And I was sent to St. Andrews, not being able to argue very strongly against it, to study biochemistry and various other sciences. But spent all my time making movies and was very lucky to graduate in that area. But I felt it was worth doing at the time. And if you start, you have to finish. But I did a film on Crusader castles with some other students from an Arab point of view. And this was bought by the BBC on the basis of my camera work. But then they screwed up the editing so much that I saw there was a competition to get into the BBC as a trainee sound recordist, cameraman, or editor. So I chose editor. And so I became, for 5 years, very quickly, because the BBC Two was starting, I got quite quickly into being a full-time editor and did a lot of films. But if you're an editor, you're a kind of cocky person. You think you can do better than anybody else. But in the case of BBC Scotland, that didn't mean you were good at all, because it was a very poor standard there at that time. And also, just to lead to the first question, really, I was working in a Mackintosh deconstructed building because the BBC had bought the first women's medical centre, student college, called Queen Margaret College for Women Medicine, and half demolished it for their premises in Glasgow. And I was taken round of my first day there, and I said, that looks like Mackintosh. I said, who's that? And that was the attitude in Glasgow at the time.
And that's how you came also into architecture, because you...
Yeah. Well, I had a fantasy. I came from the same part of the world as Mackintosh did. Unbelievable, the place is called Dallas, south of Elgin. Not wee Dallas, not big Dallas. And I spelt my father's mother's name, my grandmother's name was MC Cap I Tosh, which is how he spelled his name originally. So I had the fantasy that I was actually maybe related to him. So that's how I got going.
Into Macintosh.
We never can prove it because the records weren't there to prove it, but it's always a nice fantasy. So I thought I wanted to be an amateur architect, really.
And so you were always attracted by architecture?
I was. And especially the state in Glasgow at the time, because he was considered to be, by the Treasurer Samuels, who I interviewed, because I was doing research on Macintosh, and he said to me, this is city number one there, after the mayor, Lord Provost, he said, Macintosh was a long-haired architect who just hit the bottle. That was the attitude. Unbelievable, huh?
Yes, quite. And so you could destroy him also.
Yeah, exactly.
And how did you choose your topics? How do you choose your topics? Macintosh is...
Well, Macintosh was definitely needing to be done because there was a very good professor of fine art at the Glasgow University who had the archive, and he was meant to be a difficult person, but I was collecting a few things, and I rang him up, and he agreed to see me, and then stupidly at the end of it, I said, well, I'm Professor McLaren Young, I work at the BBC. He said, oh, in that case, Mr. Grigor, I thought you were a serious person. I couldn't possibly see you, which is a wonderful reply from this guy. And anyway, we got on very well, and I worked together on the first big Macintosh exhibition in 1968, which is the centenary of his birth in 1868, but not in Glasgow. It was in the Edinburgh Festival, and that toured a lot of continental cities, ended up in the Venice Biennale, where Hans Lein saw it. So that really got me going. And you were talking about a film in Hoffman then, but that never happened in the end.
And so you did exhibition and movie.
Yeah, well, I helped the exhibition. I did exhibitions later on, but I helped Andrew on that exhibition. And the film went with the exhibition everywhere. So.
And how did you choose the topics afterwards? There are some Scottish topics, obviously, like Robert Adam or Greg Thompson.
I was actually at the same time running the Edinburgh Film Festival, and so there wasn't so much time. But I was attached to an organisation called Films of Scotland, which was what they call in Britain a quango. It was set up by the government, given no money. As John Grierson said, it had to remit, but no remittance. So we were looking for subjects to do, and European Architectural Heritage Year was coming up. And so that's how I did the Robert Adam film.
And the others, like Frank Lloyd Wright or Johnson or Lautzner?
Then the bicentennial was looming up, and I was involved with Hans Lein on these films, little films, design movies. And there was a thing called the Bicentennial Fellowship in the Arts between the UK and the USA for 5 to go from each country and work with opposite numbers. And there were 10 categories in the arts. Right at the bottom was architecture, and the right at the bottom was film. So I proposed Frank Lloyd Wright film. So I had a kind of double chance of getting it. So I got it, and we moved. And it didn't really work out because the person I was put in charge with was the only American I could ever get on with, the Anglophiles, you know, who like the old snobbish order. And so I had to fire him in the end. But fortunately, in the festival, we ran some films of Ian Hugo, whose real name was Hugh Geiler, who was married to Agnes Nin. And Hugh Geiler said to me, why don't you go and see... technically it was Agnes Nin's other husband on the West Coast, because at that time you could actually travel across the country and you could have 2 wives, or 2 husbands rather. And he was Frank Lloyd Wright's stepson, Rupert Pole. And he was most helpful. And then Eric Wright, the grandson of Lloyd Wright, Lloyd Wright's son, he got me in touch with the Olgivana Milanov, or Lazovic, her real name is, from Montenegro. And she was a very difficult person to get round because Frank Lloyd Wright had said, you can't really photograph my buildings. And he hated what they called the Ezer stellarization of architecture because, you know, Neutra and Schindler, you could just get one shot and you could probably get a good idea of the building. With his buildings, because they're asymmetric, you couldn't get the terminals. So he was very much against it. And so Mrs. Wright thought that's also with film. With film, you actually could turn the corner a bit, you know. So I tried to argue with her, and she wouldn't. I had several visits, like going to Chekhov, going to Moscow every year, and eventually I wore her down. And I filmed from an office in Taliesin West, and I found out in a testament, his last book, he says, the Macintoshes of Glasgow were the breakthrough for me. And I think if you look at Frank Lloyd Wright's Oak Park studio in his house, you see these high-back chairs, which clearly come from Macintosh. And so he said, oh, yes, I can see. I could hear the pages like a radio program. I could hear the pages being turned in the next door, up in the wing of Taliesin. And said, but the otother people here, Ashby, Lutchins and so on. But anyway, I got to see her. And I don't know if anyone's been to Taliesin West, but there's a kind of kitschy, kind of Flintstonies, as the Italians might call it, built off Frank Lloyd Wright rock, kind of parody with little ditzy little lights, like LED lights before LED lights were invented. And one of the stones moved back, and out came two dogs, followed by Dr. Roark. And Dr. Roark was living with Mrs. Wright at the time. And where have we heard that name before? Of course, the Fountainhead. And the Fountainhead was the name given to a house that Frank Lloyd Wright designed for Ayn Rand. So this became quite strange. And then in comes this princess, really, a little lady. But, you could meet the President of America, but maybe not the present one, and maybe the Queen of Britain, but not... you found a great nobility in this woman, Mrs. Wright, you see. And she sat down beside me. And if you make a film and you're sitting next to the person watching it, you know that film's going down pretty well or very badly. And I felt it was going down very, very badly. I could feel her sort of just recoiling from the Macintosh film, at the end of which she said, "Well, Mr. Macintosh, you know nothing about architecture, organic architecture." Do I correct my name? I thought, no, but she's a great Gurdjieffian. She's trying to test my ego if I'm so fragile that I would have to correct my name. So I kept quiet about that. And then we spent another 10 minutes, and she ended up by saying, would I be able to work with a member of the Taliesin community? And they all have the beatific smile, So I said, of course. Mr. Grigor, I've kept calling you Mr. Macintosh. And I said, well, it's extraordinary, Mrs. Wright, but my grandmother was called Macintosh. There I intuited.
So that's how you came to the...
Right.
And how do you... So you choose...
Well, at the beginning you can choose, yeah.
At the beginning you choose, and afterwards you have commissions.
Well, it depends on the ecology of the funders, because Channel 4 was a great opportunity. So that's how we did Scarpa. That would never be made now, because Scarpa, it's been big brothered, it just does stuff as anybody else does, So it's very hard, architecture films are very hard to do, really. And yet the most interesting things I think you can do, because you get a pretty good idea of approximating a visit by making a film. But nothing better than going to the building itself, of course.
In an article you sent me by Colin MacArthur, he calls you an auteur, and he opposes it to a metteur en scène. Would you agree with that? And if
of course, it's very flattering to say that, because he's a friend of mine, but it annoys a lot of people.
What does that mean for you?
Well, I do my own research, and I don't suffer commission editors too kindly, and so I'm not often commissioned, of course, as a result of that. But I like to plough my own field, really. So
from the choice of the subject up to the filming and editing.
But as Philip Johnson says about architecture, we're all whores anyway, so we'll take the job if you're offered it,
One of the most striking aspects of your documentaries is the voice you give to other persons. And I've just chosen two as short movies, which I would like now to start with.
Well, that's a funny old world. 25, 30 years ago, and only now I find out who the architect was, John Locke. But you couldn't go there and not be impressed by the site that he'd chosen, right in the heart of the rocks on the mountainside. And that formed part of the walls, where one had this marvellous altercation with Bambi and Thumper. Certainly stays with me. I must say the most impressive thing about it was, apart from the height, was the swimming pool was like the patio, and it went straight out to a waterfall, and it looked like it was the end of the earth.
So here you don't have an architectural historian or researcher like in the Macintosh film, in the early movies you did, but a kind of amateur.
Well, he's caught up in that architecture, but it was one of the key buildings that Ken Adam didn't design, as it were. But it's a perfect Bond set, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. People ask me, how do I get Sean Connery to the Elwood House in Palm Springs? Well, Palm Springs came to Sean Connery. We filmed that in his Bahamas. I'm a great Scottish nationalist, but I live in Bahamas.
And I want to show a second example, perhaps a movie you did on Johnson. And here also, there are others who are speaking about architecture.
Oh, this is Johnson Wax?
Yes.
Oh, no, yeah.
And here you come into the guest room, or you could call it the sex room because it's meant to be a sexy place. The main point of it is a copy of Sir John Soane, a breakfast room at his house in London. And he has a breakfast room there that all the light comes around a low dome, a flat dome like this. And it is one of the best rooms in London.
Small, it's just nothing, but the richness, the layering of space, and so forth, that was what I took away from it.
Bob Stern, before it was Philip Johnson.
In the early 60s, I saw the Sun Museum. I saw that enchanting paneled room where the Hogarths are hung and you open successive layers of panels. The idea that an architect could have so much fun.
I went to Dulwich Picture Gallery. It was easy to see how a great picture gallery could be.
The desire was to create a museum in which the visitor could see works of art only in natural light during the day without a need for any artificial light. And of course, this led us back to John Soane.
Which admirer?
Historians tell us that Soane was a controversial architect, and I think that's attractive to us because we've always been, in our more modest way, controversial.
What is striking in the movies after the movie on Macintosh is that you integrate more and more different persons who are commenting the architecture. It's not anymore the authorial point of view where the art historian, you as the art historian, comment on architecture, but it's a whole bunch of people commenting on it. Is it in...
Well, you have to go where the bones are if you're a dog,
Yes.
The reason for this film is very strange because I noticed that it was going to be 250th anniversary of Sir John Soane, and I applied to BBC and got a very positive reply if I got some American money. And the next thing is Alan Yentob. And Alan Yentob is one of these new characters who knows nothing about anything and blocks the views of architecture or any subject he's doing. And he stole the idea, and it's like a bad love affair. You don't hear any more from the BBC. But then there was this organization who you'll later see the film I did on Charlie Gwathmey called the Checkerboard Foundation, which is run by a frustrated filmmaker who was a banker in Argentina, and he lives in New York, called Ed Howard. And he set up this thing called the Checkerboard Foundation. And the Checkerboard Foundation is for living American artists. And he has a very talented wife who comes to London, and she's American, and she designs interior decoration for a lot of American homes in London and the embassy and all kinds of places. But he's always at the loose end. And I met him in London. He said, "What else have you got, Murray?" And I said, "I got John Soane." I said, "Is he American?" I said, "No, it's worse. He's dead." So how can we do that? And I said, well, all the architects I've met in America, the person who got them out of strict modernism was Sir John Soane. And so there you saw, a number of people like Venturi, Denise Scott Brown, Harry Cobb, Richard Meyer, Michael Graves, Bob Stern, all these people. They saw how you could actually be innovative, but not necessarily ape the past. And so that's how that film came about. And I'm very pleased to see it because it's actually a different way of doing it. So the one person missing there was Charlie Jenks. He's also in the film later on.
Yes. But this becomes a kind of rule in later films. So, for instance, in the John Lautner film, you have a lot of clients.
Yeah, well, it's also the ecology of television. They kind of demand that kind of treatment. But I think also the Lautner film, we will see a little bit of, we saw, but the clients were so interesting because, everyone knew what a Schinkel or a
Schindler.
A Schindler or a Schindler or a Neutra house would be, but you never knew what a Lautner was. He never repeated himself, and he absorbed all the clients' ideas, and plus sometimes there are crazy sites that were available to him. And so I thought it was very important to have the client's view of that. And also a lot of them helped build the place, it's extraordinary. The Wallstrom House, for instance, and these two dear people have now died, so these films are worth doing simply to capture these. Because architecture, going back to Venturi, to the past, is often about the client as well. It's a collaboration, isn't it, really?
Yeah, completely. But, for instance, in the later movies like Greg Thompson, a Glasgow architect of the 19th century, you have an art historian, a famous art historian, Gavin Stam. On the other side, you have also the owners of the house. So it's a strange. It becomes a strange perspective, or not that strange, but a series of different perspectives on architecture. And it's not so much you anymore commenting, but it's much more you directing different characters throughout.
That's probably true. But I think also. I use scores quite, I hope, a narrative way. Because the score of the Greg Thompson film, which you'll see a clip of. I think, no, you don't see a clip of it.
No, we don't see.
Okay, maybe next year. There's a narrative of eternity and a repetition and so on. But it's very hard to get these films on the air. And you don't get them on the air, it's hardly worth doing them because there seem a lot of people on the air, of course, television. But the wretched head of programs on BBC Scotland took off my score, and so you don't get your own way completely. But then the film exists, and it got a few coconuts here. It got the Oper Nostra Award and so on with the real score. So I was quite happy. Well, I think I had to change with the times a little bit, really. Yeah, but it's very interesting talking to Laurent here because he's like going to analysis. You don't realize what you're doing, which is very good. But I guess it's intuitive, really.
Yeah, but you should turn around and lie on the table.
Okay.
So this one aspect I was interested in, and the second aspect, and we are going to see it in the next movie, is that you also bring different times into the movies. For instance, we're going to see it in the Frank Lloyd Wright movie. You take a historical movie from Frank Lloyd Wright. You bringing also a collage or a comic strip to show the destruction of Chicago by the fire. Yeah. And in the clip we are going to see you even bring a kind of wrong historicity with the cars, or you reconstruct a kind of history.
We'll come back to that because it's an interesting story.
Oh.
The administration building for the Johnson Wax Company of Racine, Wisconsin, in 1936. Here, Wright encircled a basic brick structure with bands of glistening, translucent Pyrex tubing. Once again, a client with imagination and power and money. Herbert Johnson was the president of his own private company. For him and his staff, Wright constructed a great cathedral of commerce, founded on the successful marketing of Johnson's household brands. Some of Wright's ideas lay well beyond the imagination of state building codes. To win his Wisconsin building permit, Wright arranged this dramatic public spectacle. Officials claimed that his elegantly thin concrete columns were too weak to support the roof. Ton by ton, he ordered one to be loaded up. The state engineers required the columns to support between 2 and 12 tons loading. With 60 tons up, Wright was allowed to start building. In fact, these slender columns supported little. They were there to create a great communal working space in the spirit of the Larkin building of 30 years before. The walls of the building, which were merely screens below the bands of tubular glass, were made of a series of hard red bricks in an assortment of prearranged curves, raked out in long horizontal lines. The smooth curves celebrated the age of streamlining. A carport, integral to the master plan, complemented the best of contemporary automobile design. Wright heartily approved of the famous cord. A tall research tower came 10 years later as counterpoint to the almost feminine curves of the long, low original building. Laboratories and workspaces cantilevered off a central stalk like the branches of a tree. Looking out from the inside, there was no view of the dingy downtown industrial landscape. Only patterns of light refracted through Wright's shimmering tubes of glass. Wright called this the great workspace. The slender columns sprang from 9-inch bases and supported concrete circles of 20 foot in diameter, 24 feet above the office floor. A complexity of cantilevers hidden in the simplicity of Wright's organic, lily pad-like forms.
So how does one prepare such a movie?
Well, get the funding first.
The scenario.
Yeah, well, but unless you have a reality of getting it made, it's very hard. At this period in America, if you asked an American architect who are the great modern architects, they would say Corbusier, Mies van der Rohe, Breuer. About Frank Lloyd Wright? Oh, he was a kind of hick from the sticks. They really put him down. And Lawton would have the same feeling. There's a lot of buyers from the East Coast, and he was from the Midwest. So there was very hard. And the woman in the National Endowment, who I hope to get some funding for, said there's this persistent Scotsman who wants to make a film on the dead architect. That was Frank Lloyd Wright. Unbelievable. But, the great thing was this was it became quite a strong project because one of the Hearst cable channel came in, which is very ironical because Hearst was the one paper that really went for Wright about his morals. So it was a kind of irony in that. But anyway, the Arts Council of Great Britain put up most of the money for it.
And then you go to libraries, or you visit the sites, or
yes,
how does one proceed?
Well, the great thing of my chance was to get this bicentennial fellowship, but it wasn't. It was quite a modest amount of money. The pound was weak against the dollar, but It was very flexible America at that time. The person in the State Department, I always remember her name, Mary Sierra. I said, I've been offered to make 2 films for the American Institute of Architects, because this was a time when they were trying to work out why buildings were always built the same way in different ecologies. For instance, a hospital up in Buffalo, New York, and the same hospital was built in San Diego. The one in San Diego used more power, electrical power, to cool itself during the summer than the one in the north to heat itself in the winter. And so why don't people design for the States? And there was a fascinating exhibition, a symposium. The AI brought back all kinds of building types, and they set these architects to design a better impact on the ecology, on where these buildings were sited, location, and so on. And they showed things like 4 corners, in where all these states meet in Utah and Colorado, up at the top there, where the Indians of 500 AD built into the shelf of the rock. So that in the winter, the sun would come in and warm them, and then in the summer, the rays couldn't get in to cool them. I mean, so they knew about this then. Why do we know it now? And they show things about a grouse moor in Scotland where 400 birds were on the sunny side of the hill, and 2 birds who were obviously from eccentrics on the other side. And that was the way it is. So but I wasn't allowed to make this film because I was on a certain visa. So this woman in the State Department said, I have to see the contract. And I sent the contract. And he said, if my superiors see this contract, the boys in blue will be taking you to LAX and you'll be deported. So she said I was of independent means. And I thought very few countries would have done that at the time. I don't know, it would be very difficult now, I think, to do that. So I was able to buy a car then, because the films were quite profitable. I edited them myself, shot, we did them all. And I had 2 kids and my wife. We drove all across the north and all the way down south and all the way back. And right at the end, I was stampeded by Mrs. Wright, who wanted to see me. But if I hadn't been to all these places, we wouldn't be able to know how to do it. So that's how I built the scenario, obviously.
And then you went back again?
I went back again. Then
with the crew?
With the crew, that's right, exactly. Yeah.
And so you had also collected the different historical movies, like this one on the construction side?
Yes. Well, I knew about that film, yes, that's true. And the interesting thing, I don't know if you saw, first of all, the voice was by Frank Lloyd Wright's granddaughter, the great actress Anne Baxter. He loved Anne Baxter, so that was very nice to have that sort of family connection. And the chord, Wright had a pretty good opinion of himself. He said, you know, I influenced the automobile design. Well, it's not true. The chord came first, and he influenced him. It's the same with the Chrysler Building. You know, the Chrysler Building, the big hawks by Chesley Bunzel, Van Alen's building, influenced the hood ornament or the bonnet ornament of the Chrysler car of 1929. Interesting.
And so that's so you brought the old cars in.
Yes. So the idea of the cars were at every building, for instance, when you're at Unity Temple, you see little buggies and then the Ruby House. They're all the same year as a house, but they're all changing. And yet the house, I'm trying to make it show the point that they're kind of timeless, really, these houses.
The timelessness of the house and the changing mood.
Falling Water, we had a 1939 Buick. And the best one of all was this extraordinary man called Carl Tompkins. He was a used car dealer in Cincinnati. And he was a cheeky guy, and he wrote to Wright and said, you wouldn't build a house for me, I'm just an average Joe. So he invited him to Taliesin, and they drew up plans, and he sent them the plans. And Wright, of course, had a lot of the apprentices draw up these houses. You know, he didn't necessarily do it himself, but he would pass them through. But this guy, Tompkins, said, I do not see the hand of the master on this. So he sent them back. So he was summoned back to Taliesin, this major architect, with this guy who was a used car dealer. And he said, You're right. Come into the parlor, said the spider to the fly. And he drew up, you could see he drew it himself. And it's one of the first Usonian houses made of glass blocks. And this guy was very interesting to me because he filmed every single block being put on top of each other. He had hundreds of feet of film. And so I integrated it. But the best thing of all was each of those houses that he built, one of the apprentices from Taliesin would supervise it. So it was Frank Lloyd Wright's grandson, Eric Lloyd Wright, who was the grandson, and he looked like one of the Beach Boys at the time, in a plaid shirt, and I had footage of him, and it's fantastic. So at that time, news got out about this building that Carl Tompkins was getting built for himself, and he became rich, and he then became a Cadillac dealer. So then he started giving Cadillacs to Frank Lloyd Wright, so things got very sweet, and the building started to go up, and Eric was working on it. And so I integrated this, how we filmed it, with the amount of footage we're getting. And then he met some lawyer on a golf course when I was finishing the editing, and he said, this guy Grigor is going to make a fortune out of this film. I mean, if you make a nickel out of a documentary, you're lucky, you know, but you're not going to make a fortune. And so he withdrew the offer. So I thought, oh, you've got to let me have this. So I went back and he agreed again. And then he disagreed. So I just said, that's it. So I went to see him and he wouldn't budge. So I drove back to Los Angeles to meet Eric, forgetting the fact Cincinnati is about 1,200, 1,300 miles away. And about 600 miles down the road, I was at Fort Smith, Arkansas, and it was an agricultural fair, and I couldn't get a bed. And then the guy behind me, I got the last room in Fort Smith, Arkansas. The guy behind me said, I can't believe you're from Inverness, Scotland. I'm from there too. And so I said, well, come and stay in my room. And then I quickly thought, I better come out for dinner in case he thinks I'm a serial killer or something, you know. So by the time I got to Eric Wright 2 days later or 3 days later, my mother had heard that I was a good Samaritan and picked up her kid. You know, it's an incredible small world, really.
Yes, yes, it seems
Anyway, anyway, we made that film, and Eric's great in it, but we don't have the footage of that, which is a shame. And he then regretted it, of course, but never.
And how does one film architecture? What are the possibilities? Here again, I want to show three short extracts of movies. The first from your first movie. Oh. On Macintosh.
The Glasgow School of Art. Like a Highland fortress on Highlandman's Hill, the school,
you can't hear the sound.
All sides by the humdrum piles of commercial Glasgow, becomes the most remarkable building of its time. Modern, uncompromising, one of the first structures of the modern movement. Against the Scottish snow-capped hills, traditional, medieval, and like most things medieval, functional. Facing north, the studio frontage, wide northern light-giving windows. On the upper story, they're 22 feet high. Here, even the decorative iron has a function. The supports for the window cleaner's ladder. Inside, ideal conditions. Painter's light from a northern sky. A building full of studios, each designed in celebration of its function. At a period when decoration was added to construction, Macintosh turns construction into decoration. Common angle iron, never bent to better use. Macintosh, over the dozen years the school is building, continually modifies his plan. A corridor linking the new part with the old becomes known to generations as the hen run. Outside, his building expresses growth. Growth from the inside needs of a growing school. Organic architecture expressed in a style now all Mackintosh's own. The school conservatory, so daringly cantilevered, is in essence an overhanging parapet of a castle keep. The castle's 3 arrow slots are in fact 3 air intakes. Intakes for one of the first ventilation systems ever made. Fresh air still travels up through the school, up the original ducts to the rooftop ventilators. Here a frame for the director's studio. Portcullis to draw and lower canvases too big for the director's stairs. Mackintosh leaves nothing, however small, to chance.
An extremely clear aesthetic approach. Black and white, frames, which are static frames, where the movement of the person go along the corridors or along the streets. So how is the relation between the architecture you film and the techniques, the filmic techniques you use?
Well, first I must apologize for the quality of that. It's a 35mm film, and I'm trying to get these back on proper copies because this is very poor. But that's my first film, and it was very modest budget and everything and so on. But I'd spent a lot of time in trying to work out exactly what we should show, and also to show it's an inhabited space and not a museum. And so that's how we put all the people into it.
So, you have in other films the camera moves.
Yes.
And what is striking here is the camera never moves, or only in 1 or 2 occasions.
Well, the sad truth is I wanted to track, but we couldn't afford it.
Okay.
But it was handheld, so there are some moves in it, really. Yeah. The hand run, for instance.
Just the hand runs in the corridors and up the stairs.
Yeah, and I've done 2 more films since then on Mackintosh. And now, of course, the tragedy is a tutor allowed a kid to do her last year conceptual piece, highly flammable piece, in a room that Mackintosh designed for clay modeling. And unfortunately, there was a fire, and it destroyed not only the great masterpiece of Mackintosh, the library, but 110 pieces of his original furniture. It should never have happened. And next door, I have a big problem with the Newbury Tower, which was a kind of sub-Paul Rudolph building. But now Steve Hall got this kind of starchitect to put up a building in front of the art school. So it now casts south light back into north light seeking windows. It's a horrible morgue-like building. And Steve Hall was the architect. And he talks in phenomenological sentences about how glass is transcendent and the driven voids of Mackintosh. So yes, it's appalling. And we're obsessed now with starchitects, whereas Newbury, who was the headmaster of the school, was called the headmaster then, the director, he got Mackintosh, the local boy, to do it, which is interesting now. We don't know.
And did it change the way you would film the building later? Or would you do it a similar way, black and white, for instance? Or
yeah, it's very desaturated color, you're right. Yeah.
And also this voice, which is off, which is somehow commenting.
Yes.
It recalls me very much on the kind of French aesthetics.
Yeah, well, that's very flattering.
Okay, we continue. Next one is the Adam movie.
Kedleston Hall in the flat meadows of Derbyshire brings to British architecture what Adam calls a greater movement in outside composition. And in the decoration of the inside, an almost total change. His patron, Sir Nathaniel Curzon, is, in Adam's modest words, struck all of a heap with wonder and amaze over his plans for the state apartments like the great marble hall. Here, with its 20 Corinthian capped columns of Derbyshire alabaster, is an imperial palace, not shabbily ruined as on the Adriatic, but in its glory in the heart of England. coffered dome surmounts the circular saloon like a sacred vestibule of ancient Rome. In Adam's hands, classicism returns triumphant and even extends into the countryside.
So here's an incredible move of the camera, which is first looking at the columns, and that slowly goes into the ceiling, and then onto the lintel. And again, so how does one decide these kind of moves?
Well, it's the idea of interpreting how you might see the building as an interpretive camera. And that's how I saw the building. You know, you look, you see this immensity of the space, and then your eye catches the oculus up, and you turn round. And so you can actually, instead of having a lot of shots showing the details of the building, you can do it in one continuous move. So that was my thinking behind that. And so you got a feeling of how those spaces interrelate each other. Another part of the film in Sign House, even more explicit. But that was how do you see a building when you go and visit it? The first thing you do, you want to get away from a commentator or from a tourist guide, and you want to see it quietly. And but then, in a sense, the music adds some sort of ingredient to that. But I'm feeling that those were trying to approximate to how you might visit that building.
And here you work with a cameraman from Kubrick, right?
Yeah, the cameraman was a wonderful man called David Peat, but the camera grip, the gaffer grip, was a guy called Tony Cridling, who had worked just on Clockwork Orange with Kubrick. So this movements are to die for, you see, and it's quite heavy equipment, and you have to. It's a wonderful person that can do that, because you have the brain, a brawn, and the physical strength to move it, and the camera is really almost staying there, and just slowly compensating for it. Yeah. Unfortunately, that'll be greater in 35mm because it was reduced from a 60mm print. That it's very encouraging to see it, though.
But it's a completely different way of filming than the first one, for instance.
Yeah. Well, that was my first film.
Okay.
So I was going to learn something.
Okay.
Maybe.
Yes. So let's go to a later one.
Right.
Which is the Lautner movie again.
You enter the house through this gate that was designed by Matthias Gerritz, a very important Mexican artist. You cross the moat on a bridge, and it moves you even closer to the ceiling. And you cannot see how enormous the ceiling is, because the whole thing is foreshortened. It's tilted up towards the sky. It's not until you start moving around in this house that the house starts to expand slowly.
I felt that the best thing that could be done there was to keep the beauty of the Acapulco Bay in the sky with no interference.
It's always about being within his spaces.
It is.
And never about being outside looking at them.
He never thought of his buildings as objects in the landscape. Right. I mean, it's always about the space and how the architectural space connects to the landscape.
The clients in Acapulco understood the idea immediately, and they just went ahead and did it completely without any quibbling or compromising, and the builders down there loved it. In fact, the builders in Mexico are architects, so the architect builder was proud to do it. Well, here you can't even get a contractor to bid one because it's not the same as every other one, and they don't want to even bother. Under construction, the people around Acapulco thought it might become a bull ring.
So here again, a completely different move again. It's not about spaces, but it becomes suddenly the relation between space and construction.
Well, that is an astonishing building. That's actually the Arango house. We weren't allowed to call it that because they're very sensitive. The Arangos run all the big Mexican supermarkets. but also very key players are Spanish. And so Placido Arango was the person who negotiated the return of Guernica from the Museum of Modern Art to the Prado, and now it's in the Reina Sofia in Madrid. But, I mean, Frank Lloyd Wright took down the corners of the building. Lautner took down the whole facade. So, I mean, it's extraordinary. So, in a lot of part of the film, he talks about how he has no little Richard Meyer type railings. You know, he just has a moat in case anyone drops off 1,000 feet precipice there. He said the kids could just fall into the water because they might drown in the moat, but never mind. But it's an extraordinary building, that, and it actually relates, I don't know if you agree, Laurent, but it relates to the Perlman Cabin, a tiny little building in the woods in Idlewild, outside Los Angeles. So he always had these ideas in his head, but that's an extraordinary, because he worked on the measures of the wind coming through, cooling the building and so on, and how that was sited. But it's very interesting. It couldn't be built in the United States. It had to be built in Mexico, and probably by the same techniques they built the pyramids. You know, it's wonderful, that, really.
And that's why you gave such an importance to the construction.
Yeah, yeah. And also this was the first film I did with a very talented cinematographer who did a lot of high-end commercials, which he got highly paid for. Like, for instance, the bulls going down Wall Street, which he shot on a huge screen of like a tennis court screen of green. It had these bulls actually charging at him in Montana. He's a crazy guy, and they almost killed him. But he then feathered them into Wall Street, and he got very famous for doing these type of commercials. And this film in Lautner was put down for an exhibition by Nick Olsberg, who with Frank Escher, and I got invited to do it because we worked on the Scarpa film, which you'll see later, and it had to be an all California crew, so I had to find local people. And but Hamid Shams, whose name is Iranian American, we really hit it off, and we've done now 6 films together, just the two of us, instead of having a crew. Which, when I started off in television, was like 14 people in the crew. It was like a centipede on expenses. You know, now we have 2 of us, and we bring in, obviously, cranes and things, or now, I dare say it, maybe a drone, but we hide the fact it's a drone. No, that was done by a crane.
Is that a crane?
Yeah. But if you use a drone sensibly, you can actually use it as a tracking, you know. Yeah.
And here is also the voice of John Lautner, right?
Yes, John Lautner had a very bad time because the New York press, the East Coast, when he started off, he, of course, was, Frank Lloyd Wright always said, the second greatest architect in the world, leaving it quite clear who the number 1 was. But he was his favorite apprentice, and he worked on the Sturgis House in Los Angeles. And then the war came, and he built his own house at a very tough time. But then he found these wonderful clients there. Even though he hated Los Angeles, he found clients that did diners and restaurants. And one of them was named after called the Googie Diners. And also where Lana Turner and kind of a lot of folklore connected with Hollywood. But they're all trashed by the East Coast writers. But the fact they had a central space, because the American diners were just railroad cars, really, you know, but these were beautiful shapes. But if you design a very beautiful restaurant with a beautiful view of the hills, it's not good for the client because people sit in and they don't leave. And so you're better off probably at an ugly diner. But he got a bad press, and it hurt him a lot. And so he got very bitter, Lautner. And I've got a scene in the film with Frank Gehry, because Frank Gehry adored him and went to see houses he had built, and says I would annoy him as people annoy me now going to see your houses. But in fact, he boxed his way out of Frank Lloyd Wright, and every house he did was slightly different for a client. So unfortunately, we couldn't bring the clients. They're very they want to be very low profile. They fly under the radar. They're Rangos. So, but all the other houses, we bring in the client in a very big way.
And so Lautner, give a comment here.
Oh, sorry, I forgot to say.
Yes.
So at the end of his life, the American Institute of Architects didn't really honor him, but the local chapter did. And so he gave this talk to his architectural peers. So he's talking up, not just down. And so this is a very insightful commentary, really. So we use that as part of, a key part of the film, really.
And so in your research, you follow somehow the traces you find.
Yes, yes.
And seldomly you give a comment. Let's say that's really a bad corner.
Not a bad comment.
A bad corner.
Oh, bad corner. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, Frank Escher says quite a lot in the film. The Getty took over his archive, and they were extremely difficult people to deal with. You're not allowed to show the Getty. I can't imagine why you're not allowed to show the Getty. It was Richard Meyer's big building, based on his experience with John Soane. But that's the way they have it. So, we stopped filming. Somebody saw a small head moving along the bottom of the screen. I said, "But you want me to recognise who that is? How can you worry about that?" So, anyway, it's very strange.
In a text, you say that architecture is all about space, and film is all about time. And strangely, I have the feelings when looking at the 3 movies we have seen, it's all about space and not about time somehow.
Yeah.
There is no real, actually, what interests you is the architectural object, the architectural space, eventually the architectural surface also, which is but less the time experience. Right?
Maybe the light experience.
Light.
But I was actually quoting from Jimmy Stewart, who said, "Pieces of time."
Yes, and you took it over.
I took it over, but I thought it was a lead in, but I should have thought of it. So you're bringing a lot of... quite right to criticize.
But there is one good example of time, and we see it here. Next movie, it's on Carla Scarpa.
What happened here had nothing to do with bombs. Scarpa demolished both the stairway and a corner of the French barracks in progressive strokes of creative demolition. A moat was discovered, then excavated, before Scarpa had any definite idea what he'd do here. Eventually, this crucial space would pivot on the Great Cangrande. Originally, Scarpa had the sculpture guard the entrance before the great idea struck him.
So here, it's somehow the counterexample, where suddenly one sculpture is seen through a multitude of angles in time.
Well, that was a very famous sculpture. It was Dante's Cangrande, and it's still in Verona. And putting it on that plinth there is an extraordinary achievement, really. It's central to the building and central to the history of Verona, and very controversial. Art historians don't like it because pigeons can sit on it and so on, but it's cleaned up pretty often. So, but it's a most marvelous, moving monument, I think. That.
And so it was retracing somehow the architect's intention.
Yes. I mean the idea of creative demolition is an extraordinary thing. I was there when we were doing research on that, and I met the head of conservation in Verona, and I said, in the UK you wouldn't be allowed to do that. He said, you're not allowed to do it here either. But we just thought that Magnato, who was the director, and Scarpa would come up with something pretty good. So that's great faith. Only Italians could do that, I think. It's great to have faith in architects, because architects really are major thought considerably higher than anywhere else in Europe, I think, in Italy. You go to a restaurant with Arida Rudi, and it was a great assistant to Scarpa, and, architetto maestro, come on, you get the best table and everything. You're an architect, you mean somebody there. In the UK, it's treated like shit, really, if you're an architect, I think. It's terrible. And
how does one prepare such such a movie on Scarpa here again. As you were in Verona in this museum, you had this statue.
Yes, well, I did a storyboard of these images, but it's a very hard building because it's a very difficult building to police because you had to seal up all the openings. So you can only go, if you want to get in there, you have to come all the way back round to go right to the front again. And unfortunately, there was an inside job and they stole about 7 or 8 major paintings, which turned up in Moldavia, so they've got them all back. But that proves the kind of thing. But I would keep seeing shots, like for instance, he's got a 12th century Christ on a black plinth of stucco lucido, and the sun was hitting it, and it couldn't possibly be from the north, but it was hitting a window. And I said, get the cameras out, we've got to get the shot, because it's lit up, this thing, it's absolutely destroying this. By that time when the Christs were like Grunewald, the very kind of a broken Christ, but it looked so terrifyingly human and great. But of course, if you think about it, a reflected sun goes twice the speed. So by the time we got the cameras down, it's gone, and I could never get it back. And also the phone rang, and it was Charles Jenks, so we missed the shot. But
so do you note this? You say, I want to see this building at 5 o'clock in the afternoon?
Yes, definitely, yes. Because that's so important, the light in the building, of course, yeah. But it's not always possible because you get a bad day or, you do some with lights, but I try to hide the light, really.
Now I want, after speaking about buildings and spaces, one thing which struck me when looking through your film is a kind of obsession with certain motifs. For instance, the oculus, the hole in the cupola where you see the sea, the sky is one of this topic. Or I found in your movies a series of sculpture of the victory of Samothrace.
Oh yes, of course. That's in yes.
It's 3 times, I think, in Frank Lloyd Wright.
Yes.
Once in Macintosh.
That's right. But I did another film on Morris Lapidus,
yes,
who had the full-scale wing victory in the Fountain Blue, as they called it, in Florida. And it was paid for by this very rich but sort of slightly ignorant person from the east side end of New York. And he said, listen, Morris, I gave you all this loot to buy sculpture, and you give me a dame without a head? Unbelievable, huh?
Yes. But it's by chance, or it becomes a kind of signature?
Well, it was a signature for Wright, really, so that's why it's there, of course. And I love in the Louvre, they have also the finger.
Oh.
It's a brilliant exhibit. It's the finger and the wing victory. They might find a toe next,
And these 2 motifs, fire and water, I have also the impression these are kind of recurring topic.
Well, Frank Lloyd Wright makes a big thing about the hearth being the heart of the building. So I always would have a little fire in all this.
So you asked
always
that somebody makes a fire?
The only one we couldn't do was a Roby house, but we had a kitsch effect. It looked as though there was a fire there.
And water?
And water, well, falling water, of course, and
falling water, but the Guatmi movie, the Scarpa movie, the Laudner movie.
Well, I wanted the opening of the Scarpa film comes out from under the lagoon and comes up, and the architect was working with Richard. He said, "What the hell are you doing this for? I mean, what's the whole point?" Unfortunately, one of the commission editors was from Channel 4, a very intelligent guy, became later the Irish film commissioner, Rod Stoneman. He said, "We're coming out from the subconscious of the city," so that made it very rational for him.
Which can be perhaps applied to the others.
Yes, exactly, maybe. Yeah.
In '76, you did this exhibition with Hans Hollein. How did the commission come?
Well, he saw the Macintosh film in Vienna, in the Venice Biennale, and we got to know him. And I had another friend who thought very highly of him, and also of Scarpa. And as Hans Hollein felt highly of Scarpa. And so I got in a conversation with him. My late wife's parents came from Vienna, and we got to know got to know Hollein a little bit, but mainly also because of this friend Michael Spence. And I think also you like to get people from out of different corners of Europe. So I'm from Scotland, so I think it was an attractive idea. So because he had all kinds of other interesting people from Aratu Sasaki from Japan, wasn't all that well known at the time, and so on. And Ettore Sottsass was very well known from Italy, and So I was just part of the team, and he had these ideas. He wouldn't let me be a contributor. He said he's a contributor. I'm actually the pencil in his hand, as you might say.
So he had the concepts.
He had the concept, most of the concepts, and sadly the great concepts. He said, "I want to be there when we film it," but he being a good architect, he could never delegate it. So he wanted to be there, but he had no time to be there. So we never did it. So the best ones we never got done. I think, really, sadly.
Which were?
Well, the one on death was he's very obsessed with death, being Viennese. You know, we have all the Undercroft and all the catacombs in Vienna and so on. He had a big number on that, and so we never did that film, which has been probably one of the best ones, I think.
And of course, there is the movie on fire.
Yes. So
how would that work? Hans Hollein would come and say, collect all possible fires?
Oh, yeah, no, that's right.
Or would you somehow...
No, I went to BBC Library and went through every fire incident. Now, that was a very interesting idea, because his idea was the design movies. His idea, taken in America, was everyone's got an attention span of a commercial break. So they all had to be the length of a commercial break. So in 4 minutes of fire, it starts off. If you happen to come into this loop at the right time, you would see a log falling down, and that would become the Hindenburg at Lakehurst, where the Zeppelin people running along the bottom of the grate, terrifying. And then always some things of terrible fires, Hindi cremations and so on. Pretty grim stuff. I was sitting there watching it, and he had it very beautifully done in a fireplace. And in the fireplace, at the actual place of the fire was a TV with all this going on, and a little digital clock above. And two young New Yorkers came in and said, "Wow, that's really European."
And for us, it's so American.
I know, exactly. Yeah.
And here is a sketch you'd sent to Hans Hollein. These are concept sketch by John Byrne.
Yes.
Towards the storyboard.
These were early sketches. Yeah.
Albring's developed outline to our Paris meeting. So two things. Who was John Byrne?
John Byrne's an interesting artist, also an extraordinary playwright as well. And he was a friend of Billy Connolly's, and I got to know him very well. And Hans actually did some more freehand sketches, and I almost feel theirs have been better in the end to have done it that way. But anyway, it's an interesting segment.
And so there were sketches by Hans Hollein, and these are
by John Byrne, yeah.
Yes.
But he didn't object to them. But I think now looking back on it, it would be better to have his sketches, I think.
And then you write Albring's developed outline to our Paris meeting. So you would meet in this big Paris meeting with Ettore Sozzas, with Isozaki.
It was the wonderful Lisa Taylor, who was the director of the Coupe Hewitt, the first director of the Coupe Hewitt. And she was married to Bert Taylor. And Bert Taylor's an old American family who owned the Tour d'Argent. They actually owned the whole block of Tour d'Argent. So they lived underneath the Tour d'Argent restaurant. Now, of course, it's expanded, the Tour d'Argent. But it was the only cellar in Paris not robbed by the Nazis during the war, because it was owned by Americans. So you had these incredible wines. And that wonderful French way where you're having these discussions, Bert Taylor would come and say, "We have to be up in 10 minutes because the soufflés will be on the table," you see. And then the wine would be served behind you. You would hear, all that kind of, telling you the secret of the wine, but still having a conversation with Hans Hollein about design. That's very French, I think. It doesn't happen in any other country.
So you would work?
You would work, and you hear the wines being spoken to your head, with an incentive to make good design. But there was a lot of argument, I think Lisa had such faith in him, and in the end, I felt I could have done much more. It was kind of early days for me, and I think Dorothy did better, because she just went ahead and did the bread exhibits, all these exhibits.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you would wait always.
Yeah, I would always wait, which I would never do it now, of course. But
so let's look at another movie you did for this exhibition, the famous Faces.
Let me run that one fast. Can you run it fast?
I have to do it myself, mechanically. Shall I?
Yeah, because it's better fast.
I don't know if it doesn't go fast.
Okay, doesn't matter.
I'm sorry.
These were based on a photo-fit police system, a French-Canadian invented. On the basis, there are two kinds of faces, a narrow face and a broad face, or a round face. And they're all shoplifters and things, photographed in various penitentiaries in Canada. And then into that, we put a few known places. And it's for, you had slots, you put different eyes in, different noses, different mouths, different hairdos, so on. The idea was a face is a design system of the same components, but of infinite variation. That sounds better in Viennese.
Yes, of course. But somehow these movies are also, I had the impression, looking at this movie, it helped me also to analyze your own film. I had the impression there is a kind of continuity, or here's a kind of concentration of topics which would become important in your movies,
yes,
or topics which were important in your movie. For instance, there is in the Macintosh movie a whole series on different lintels, on different columns.
Oh yes, that's right.
With changing, changing motifs, which are quite similar to this technique.
Interesting, yeah.
But
Andy Warhol into Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn Monroe gets her revenge.
So you wouldn't be involved in the conceptual phase of the exhibition?
No, not in that. Not what I wanted.
Were you in Wisconsin, in the Johnson Wax?
Yes,
you were there.
I was at but they didn't talk about anything else other than their contracts there.
Okay,
it's unbelievable, you know.
And
he's always getting into trouble. only in a hurry. Very good. Yeah, I wanted to have it as a kind of cut-up, but he did it on a TV set. That's all right, but the cycle's round again.
Here we are.
Very good.
There is another dimension we didn't speak about. It's the political dimension of your work. Actually, the work on Macintosh is not just a filmic or artistic or work of an author, but it's also a position towards historic preservation.
Yeah.
And it seems that perhaps in the most radical movies in which you did this is the next one, which we could quickly have a look at. This one. The first being done in 1973.
That's right.
And the second in 2009.
It was a Catholic seminary outside Glasgow, and it got... maybe I should talk afterwards.
Yes.
That was a good lecture on the origin of life, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to the next one to finish off that series.
Yeah.
I think we'll go and have a shot on the piano.
Sad. Yeah, it only lasted 14 years. After the war, Scotland, the great feeling was that the Catholic Church would expand. And in the new towns, they all had these very innovative new churches and chapels done by two wonderful architects. One was Izzy Medstein, who was on the Kindertransport, a little Jewish boy, escaped Berlin, and Annie McMillan, who escaped Protestant or Presbyterian Scotland. So they were both designing for the Catholic Church, and had a very good idea. And it was almost before Vatican II, so they were designing smaller spaces and everything. And one of the seminary for the big seminary in Scotland burnt down. So there was a beautiful Scots baronial house owned by one of the ship owners in Glasgow, and it was given to the Catholic Church. And that became the center of this Cardross Seminary, St. Peter's. And this wonderful man who was always called himself a top-drawer architect, because his name was Jack Coia, and he was Italian, who came in the top drawer of a piece of furniture from Italy when he was only 2 years old into Scotland, and grew up to create this great company called Gillespie, Kidd & Coia. And he took on these two quite very young architects. This building was done when they were both under 30, incredible. And they was overawed by Corbusier, a bit of Mackintosh as well. And it was you got into all prints, people rated it very highly. It's probably the best modernist structure in all of Britain, really. And then things went very badly wrong. Vatican II changed the rules. They wanted to have seminars in universities, not in an outpost like Augustinian church monasteries. And also the oil crisis, because the building actually wasn't all that economic, and there was a lot of cold sinks, and it leaked a lot. Izzy would say, but I leave it out in the rain, So anyway, a lot of rain in the west of Scotland. And so the church pulled out of there, and it was given to the social services people and used it as a drug rehabilitation place. Well, these kids got out of control. They set fire to bits of it that eventually ruined it completely. They burnt down the wonderful Scots Baronial House, and it became a terrible ruin. And it's now been slowly brought back as a kind of performance space by an organization called MVA. And there might be a third film in this, a triptych.
And there are a lot of contrasts, of course.
Yeah.
The black and white and the color film.
Yeah. Yeah, my naive idea was the black and white film was the early one, and the color is the resurrection. But
so it's already the third film.
It could be.
But this engagement for heritage, let's say, is a long one.
Well,
which begins in the 60s, obviously with the discovery of Mackintosh.
Yeah.
But which you also do somehow when you do movies with Sean Connery on Sean Connery's Edinburgh.
Yes.
Or when you do a film on Greig Thompson and you.
Well, the tragedy of Scotland and Britain too is the fact that our great architecture is in the hands of completely stupid councillors of the cities. Whereas in Italy, you have people who are trained architects are actually on the city boards and things, So no other city probably in Britain would have allowed Mackintosh or Greig Thompson to come to fruit. But then now there's a lot of laissez-faire, and they're ignorant councillors now running things. And they set fire to buildings, and it's in a terrible state. And when the 1960s, when Mackintosh was a reviled figure, he's now been taken as a Glasgow hero, but there's so many rubbishy Mackintosh kitsch stuff. I call it Mockintosh, and I go into it's a kind of ridicule Mackintosh. And Alexander Thompson buildings, his masterpieces, the Egyptian halls, is still a ruin. I mean, it's appalling. So that, I think, and heritage also is kitchified in Scotland, so that the government say, historic buildings have to have tourists, raise the tourism. So you do that by having faked history in it. So, for instance, Stirling Castle is a genuine Renaissance building, one of the first in the UK because of Mary Queen of Scots. And in that, they found they've got 5 unicorn tapestries, because there's a reference in James IV's inventory. There was a unicorn tapestry. So they go to New York and they find in the Cloister building, which is part of the Metropolitan, these wonderful Flemish, French tapestries of the Hunt of the Unicorn. And then they get some poor American philanthropist to put up $3.5 million to have replicas of these done, the wrong stitches, the wrong size, and Technicolor colors, and they insert them into what they thought was where it would be, and they painted up replicas of roundels, which were there but in wood, and called them James IV. And it was just a troubadour. I mean, it's just this fake history. That's okay for Disney to do it, but not for a real place. So now, if you want to see the real tapestries, you go to a building fabricated called the Cloisters in New York, or you want to see the fake ones, you go to a genuine Renaissance palace and see the fake ones inside that. And you couldn't write that.
But this is a kind of side story of your life.
Yeah.
You just get angry and then you do a movie.
Actually, yeah, I know. But you mustn't synchronize depressions, that's the point.
And you do also commercial movies. Let's go to the next one. This on Cumbernauld being a new town with a megastructure, as a only megastructure in Scotland.
Yeah, and just before you played, this was a very praised system of how you might compound a whole series of structures with housing and shops and malls and so on, all in the one space. The trouble was they built it on top of a hill, so it became very windswept and very odd. And they built a lot of the houses, which are quite well done in British standards, but they used the same houses in different parts. So when people got home with too much to drink, they would see a telephone box and a door, a blue door, a red door, and they go into it and they find out that it's the wrong part of town because it's the same building. It was unbelievable. So, and then also they had very interesting road structures. So you could go, paths would take you over all the roads. And so neighbours would call up and say, I saw Mrs. McGlumford walking across the road. Well, so they're allowed to do that. But, you know, so you almost kind of fascistic kind of things were developed over this. So anyway.
Yeah, it was quite deterministic, let's say.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think your movie is a very good analysis of it. So let's look at
just one more thing. It got all these awards in America, the Reynolds Award for the news, and then in the next decade, it got rubbish as the Carbuncle Award, you know, for the worst possible thing. It is a crazy world, really, we live in there.
And you do it in the good phase.
In the intermediate period.
Intermediate period. Okay, let's have a look at it. It's a James Bond parody, right?
Thanks, Junior.
Yes.
Peters, the girl with the granny glasses, was rapidly becoming a crucial
Can we hear it better, all right?
in the developing situation.
I cannot do it.
You are Peters?
The girl with the granny glasses, who is rapidly becoming...
Take me to someone of importance.
I will take you to my leader.
So,
So this is the mega structure behind.
Mm.
Boom. So that's what the commission.
Yes, it was paid for by. Yeah.
What did they want you to show?
They wanted to show the town, and so this came up with this very large scenario. The town has been hijacked by a wonderful vampish lady called Fenella Fielding, and she holds the town to ransom and hijacks it, and they have to pay an enormous sum to get the town back from her. She's implanted all kinds of terrible things in the city.
And he's the German...
that's right. Well, it's unspecified who he is, really.
Scientist, somehow.
Yeah, that's right.
Who builds the bombs, right?
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
And so when came the idea, because actually the whole scene, which I think is one of the masterpieces of the master moment of the movie, is all about the circulation somehow.
Yeah. Well, it's very sinister because this great writer who helped on the script of this thing is, discovered that during the war, lead up to the war, the Porton Down, which is where they made chemical warfare pellets and things. They took over this island called Grignard Island and put anthrax there, and it survives forever, anthrax, apparently. So that was a very sinister concept. So that wasn't the most popular part of the film, of course.
No, but this part here,
yeah,
which is an extraordinary scenario where where somehow you can see the whole system.
That's right. And then you have the surprise Hitchcockian end.
I can't remember.
Where the aircraft comes over and gets him. Or maybe that's cut out of that version.
Yes, there is, of course. Yes,
I haven't seen this film for about 40 years, so he dug this film up, incredible. I don't know where he found it, but...
YouTube, of course.
YouTube.
And now you asked me to put...
Oh, yes, to cheer us all up.
So this is his choice, not mine.
Scotland's commodified by tourism, and so this is about how Scotland's seen through the eyes of even major artists like Mendelssohn, with the Hebridean Overture, and played by people like Liberace and so on. So... Don't go, because it might amuse this month. That's all, folks.
Thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you. Very good. Thanks for the offer. Thank you.